Have you ever kept a secret so heavy that it threatened everything you love? I never imagined my honesty could risk my marriage, but that's exactly where I found myself. Not in a single dramatic moment, but in the small, ordinary mornings where the weight of what I wasn't saying pressed on my chest like an invisible stone. The sun was just beginning to rise over Sao Paulo, painting streaks of soft orange across the high-rise buildings outside our window. I stood barefoot in our apartment kitchen, the tiles cool beneath my feet, slicing papaya for Eduardo's breakfast. The city was already alive. Horns honking, motorcycles weaving through traffic, the distant shouts of vendors opening their stalls. I'd grown used to this symphony of chaos. It was our daily soundtrack, the pulse of the city mingling with the quieter rhythms of our life together. Eduardo's footsteps echoed down the hall. He appeared in the doorway, tie already knotted, hair still damp from the shower. He looked handsome, as always, tall, with deep-set eyes that seemed to hold 1,000 silent thoughts. But lately, those eyes rarely met mine for more than a moment. He moved through our mornings with a kind of distracted efficiency, his mind always half occupied by blueprints and deadlines. "Bom dia," I said, forcing a brightness into my voice that I didn't quite feel. "Morning." Eduardo reached for his coffee, glancing at his phone as he scrolled through emails. The screen's pale glow painted his face in sharp lines, highlighting the exhaustion beneath his calm surface. I set the plate of fruit on the table and sat across from him. For a moment, I watched the steam curl from my mug, searching for the right words, any words, to bridge the growing silence between us. I wanted to ask about his dreams, his worries, the little things that used to fill our conversations. But there was a wall now, invisible but solid, built from months of unspoken anxieties. The kitchen felt too bright, too clean. The only mess was inside me, a tangle of guilt, fear, and longing. I was rescued from my thoughts by the soft buzz of my phone. A message preview flashed on the screen. "Marta Oliveira. Are you still going to tell him? You can't keep this inside forever, Lou." I stared at the text, my fingers hovering above the screen. Marta had always been blunt, the kind of friend who cut through excuses with a single look. She lived in the apartment next to ours, her laughter often drifting through our shared walls. Sometimes I envied her certainty, her unapologetic honesty. But I wasn't Marta. I was careful, cautious. I tried to do everything right, keep our home warm, our meals delicious, our lives running smoothly. And yet, here I was, hiding something from the person I loved most. Eduardo looked up, sensing my distraction. "Everything okay?" I nodded too quickly. "Just Marta, asking about dinner plans for the weekend." He smiled, but the expression faded as his phone buzzed again. "Sorry, I have to send this before I forget." He typed rapidly, the glow of the screen swallowing his attention once more. I watched him, aching to reach across the table to confess everything, but my secret stuck to the back of my throat, heavy and sour. The morning slipped away in a blur of routine. Eduardo left with a quick kiss on my cheek, already half gone before the door closed behind him. The apartment felt emptier in his absence, the rooms echoing with silence and the distant hum of city life. I wandered through the living room, tidying stray cushions, watering the plants by the balcony. Through the window, I watched neighbors hurrying down the street, mothers shepherding children, delivery men balancing packages, couples bickering over breakfast choices. Life moved on, indifferent to the quiet storm brewing in my chest. My phone buzzed again. Marta, persistent as always. "You have to talk to him, Lucia. Secrets only get heavier." I typed a reply. "I know, just not yet." Then deleted it. What could I say? That I was afraid? That I'd let one small mistake grow into something monstrous? The words felt too big, too final. I sat on the couch, pulling my knees to my chest. The city outside was relentless, but inside, I felt suspended, caught between the life I had and the truth I was terrified to share. By late afternoon, the clouds had thickened, casting the apartment in a soft gray light. Rain pattered against the windows, blurring the skyline. I stood at the kitchen counter, chopping vegetables for dinner, trying to steady my hands. Eduardo returned just after 7, the scent of rain clinging to his jacket. He set his briefcase down and gave me a tired smile. "Long day?" I asked, handing him a glass of water. He nodded, rubbing his forehead. The new project's a mess. The client changed everything last minute. I wanted to comfort him, to tell him that we'd get through it, together. Instead, I watched as he checked his phone again, the distance between us growing with every notification. We ate in near silence, the only sounds the clink of cutlery and the soft rush of rain. I tried to start a conversation, asked about his day, his colleagues, a funny story I'd heard from Marta. He answered politely, but his mind was elsewhere. At one point he looked up, concern flickering in his eyes. "You seem quiet tonight." I hesitated, words tangling on my tongue. "Just tired, I think?" He nodded, accepting the answer, but I saw the doubt linger. He didn't push. He never did. After dinner, Eduardo retreated to his office, the door closing softly behind him. I cleared the table, my movements mechanical. The kitchen felt colder, the walls closer. I wandered into our bedroom, drawn to the small wooden dresser in the corner. I opened the top drawer, careful not to disturb the neatly folded clothes. There, tucked beneath a stack of scarves, was a sealed envelope, its edges worn from being handled too many times. I picked it up, running my fingers over the paper. Inside was the truth I'd been hiding for months, a mistake, a lapse in judgment that had spiraled out of control. I told myself I'd fix it before Eduardo ever found out, but the solution always seemed just out of reach. My reflection in the dresser mirror looked unfamiliar. Eyes rimmed with fatigue, mouth set in a worried line. I barely recognized the woman staring back. I clutched the envelope, heart pounding. What if telling the truth meant losing everything? What if my confession wasn't an act of courage, but the final blow to a marriage already straining under the weight of silence? The city's lights flickered outside, 1,000 stories unfolding in the apartments across the street. I wondered how many of them were built on secrets, on words left unsaid. I slipped the envelope back into the drawer, closing it softly. For a moment I stood in the dimly lit room, listening to the rain, to the muffled sounds of Eduardo typing in his office. Tomorrow, I promised myself. Tomorrow I'll find the words. But tonight, all I had was the echo of my fears and the knowledge that the secret, my secret, was still safe, for now. Yet as I turned out the light and slid into bed, the silence between us felt heavier than ever. The gentle rhythm of Eduardo's breathing should have soothed me, but it only reminded me of the distance I'd created. I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, wondering when my honesty had become a threat instead of a promise. And somewhere in the quiet, I realized that the real danger wasn't in the secret itself, but in the space it carved between the people I loved, and in the fear that, once spoken, it would change everything forever. A fine drizzle tapped softly against the kitchen window as Lucia stood at the counter, her hands wrapped around a mug of cooling coffee. The city hummed beyond the glass. Car horns, distant voices, the low rumble of a bus accelerating down Avenida Angelica. Inside, the apartment felt unusually quiet. Eduardo had already left for work, slipping out after another breakfast where conversation drifted like smoke, intangible and ungraspable. Lucia's gaze lingered on the sealed envelope in her drawer, a thin, accusing rectangle that pulsed in her mind like a warning. The mistake it contained had started small, a misplaced decimal, an overlooked bill, a transfer she meant to reverse but never did. It snowballed quietly, gathering weight month by month, until now she felt as if she were walking underwater, breathless, every step an effort. A sharp trill broke her thoughts. Her phone blinked. "Marta?" Lucia hesitated, then answered. "Morning, Lucia? Café do Centro in 20? I'm buying." Marta's voice was brisk, familiar, and edged with concern. Lucia agreed, sliding on a rain jacket. She needed Marta's pragmatism, her way of cutting through confusion with blunt honesty. But as she stepped onto the bustling sidewalk, dodging umbrellas and delivery bikes, the anxiety in her chest only tightened. The cafe was warm, fragrant with fresh pastries and the hiss of the espresso machine. Marta waved her over from a corner table, already cluttered with 2 cappuccinos and a plate of pão de queijo. "You look exhausted," Marta said, eyes narrowing. "When was the last time you actually slept?" Lucia managed a weak smile, stirring sugar into her cup. "I'm fine, just distracted." Marta reached across the table, her hand covering Lucia's. "You're not. I know you, Lucia. Talk to me. What's really going on?" Lucia stared at the milky swirl in her coffee, the words thick in her throat. I made a mistake, Marta. A big one. With the money Eduardo gave me for the rent and some bills, I tried to fix it, but things got out of hand. Now I'm getting calls from the bank, overdue notices. I've been hiding it from him. Marta's eyebrows shot up, but her voice stayed calm. How long? 3 months. Maybe more. Marta was silent for a moment, the cafe's noise filling the space between them. Then, you have to tell him, Lucia. Secrets like this, they don't just go away. They get heavier. And, Eduardo, he loves you. He deserves the truth. The truth. Lucia rolled the word around in her mind. It felt sharp, dangerous, like glass. What if it ruins everything? He's under so much pressure at work. I don't want to be just another problem he has to solve. Marta squeezed her hand. You're not a problem. You're his wife. No marriage is perfect, Lou. But hiding this, think about what it's doing to you. To both of you. Lucia nodded, blinking away hot tears. The world outside the cafe window was blurred with rain. Sao Paulo's relentless energy muted by the weather. She envied the people moving purposefully down the street, their lives seemingly unburdened. After Marta left for an appointment, Lucia lingered at the table, replaying every conversation with Eduardo from the past weeks. Each moment of distance, every time he'd looked at her with concern, and she'd brushed him off with a smile. She wondered if he'd already sensed something was wrong. Her phone buzzed again, a number she recognized from the bank. She declined the call, heart hammering. The envelope in her drawer felt heavier than ever. When Lucia returned home, the apartment felt colder, the echo of her footsteps a reminder of how alone she was with her secret. She glanced at the kitchen table, where Eduardo's architectural plans lay spread out in careful rows, lines and angles, blueprints for someone else's future. She touched the edge of the paper, imagining the structure of their own marriage. Strong, but perhaps not as unbreakable as she once thought. Determined, she pulled out her planner and dialed Dr. Renata Salas, her therapist, booking a session for the next morning. She needed perspective, someone who could help her see past her own fear. The therapy office was minimalist and serene, sunlight filtering through gauzy curtains. Dr. Renata greeted Lucia with a warm smile and gestured for her to sit. The room smelled faintly of lavender and old books. So, Lucia, Dr. Renata began, her tone gentle. What brings you in today? Lucia hesitated, then exhaled. I made a financial mistake. I've been hiding it from Eduardo because I'm scared. Scared he'll be disappointed, or worse, angry. I keep telling myself I'll fix it before he notices, but it keeps getting worse. I feel ashamed, like I'm failing. Dr. Renata listened, her eyes kind but steady. It's normal to want to protect the people we love from pain, Lucia, but sometimes, by hiding our mistakes, we create more distance than we intend. How would you feel if the roles were reversed? Lucia bit her lip. I'd want him to trust me, to come to me, even with bad news. Dr. Renata nodded. Exactly. Vulnerability is the foundation of intimacy. It's not about being perfect. It's about being honest, even when it's hard. But what if I make things worse? Lucia whispered. What if you make them better? Dr. Renata countered gently. What if this is the first step toward a stronger partnership? The words settled in Lucia's mind, fragile but hopeful. She left the office with her heart pounding, her thoughts swirling. On the walk home, she noticed things she'd missed before. The jacaranda trees lining the sidewalk, the laughter of children in the tiny park, the scent of rain-soaked earth. The world seemed bigger than her secret somehow. That evening, Lucia cooked dinner with extra care. Eduardo's favorite risotto, a salad with fresh basil from the balcony. She set the table, lit a small candle, and waited. Eduardo arrived later than usual, rainwater slicking his hair, his shoulders tense. He offered a tired smile as he dropped his bag by the door. Smells amazing, he said, shrugging off his jacket. Long day at the site. Sorry I'm late. They ate in near silence, forks clinking softly against ceramic plates. Lucia tried to focus on the meal, but her mind raced. She caught Eduardo watching her, concern etched in the lines around his eyes. Você está bem, Lucia? He asked gently. You've seemed distant. Did I do something wrong? No, she replied too quickly. It's not you. I'm just tired." He nodded, but didn't press. Lucia felt the words rise in her throat, and then retreat. She wasn't ready yet. Not tonight. Later, as Lucia folded laundry in their bedroom, she heard Eduardo on the phone in the living room, discussing a delayed project with a colleague. His voice was calm, but weary. She realized how much he was carrying. Deadlines, expectations, the silent hope that their life together was stable and secure. The guilt pressed in again. The next morning brought another obstacle. A letter slid under their door, marked urgente. Lucia's heart stuttered as she opened it. Another late notice, the balance growing, a warning about potential service interruptions. Panic flickered in her chest. She stuffed the letter into her purse before Eduardo could see, vowing to call the bank again. But when she tried, a polite but firm agent told her the payment was overdue by too much. They'd need to speak with the account holder. "Eduardo." Lucia hung up, her hands shaking. She scrolled through online forums, searching for advice, but nothing fit her specific situation. The problem was no longer just numbers on a screen. It was a wall growing between her and the man she loved. That afternoon, Marta stopped by unannounced, holding a bag of fresh bread and a sympathetic smile. She listened as Lucia recounted the latest notice, tears threatening at the corners of her eyes. "You can't keep doing this alone," Marta insisted, her voice low but firm. "Let Eduardo in. It's not about the money anymore. It's about trust. About not having to carry this weight by yourself." Lucia looked at her friend, wanting desperately to believe she was strong enough to face the consequences. "I'm scared, Marta. What if he never trusts me again?" Marta pulled her into a hug. "Everyone makes mistakes, Lucia. What matters is what you do next." That evening, the tension was palpable. Eduardo lingered by the window, staring out at the city lights. Lucia watched him, wondering if he could sense the storm brewing beneath her calm exterior. He turned to her, hesitant. "Is there something you want to talk about? I feel like we're living side by side, not together." Lucia swallowed, the envelope heavy in her purse. She wanted to speak, to unburden herself, but fear held her back. "I just need some time," she managed. Eduardo nodded, but the hurt in his eyes was plain. He retreated to his laptop, the soft glow illuminating his profile in the growing darkness. Lucia's phone buzzed, a gentle reminder from Dr. Renata. "Honesty is an act of courage. You're stronger than you think." She stood by the bedroom window, rain streaking the glass, São Paulo's skyline shimmering in the distance. She pressed the envelope to her chest, feeling its weight, but also the possibility that letting go could be the first step toward healing. She stepped into the hallway, the apartment quiet behind her. The envelope trembled in her grasp. Standing outside her apartment door, heart pounding, she whispered to herself, voice trembling but resolute, "If you were in my place, would you confess or keep hiding the truth?" She looked up, determination flickering in her eyes. "If you want to see what happens next, subscribe and join me for my next step." Sometimes the hardest part isn't facing others, it's facing ourselves. She took a shaky breath, the city's heartbeat echoing in her ears, and stood poised between fear and hope, unsure which would win, but ready, finally, to choose. The morning unfurled with a deceptive normalcy, a gray São Paulo sky pressing against the windows and the scent of strong coffee curling through the apartment. Lucia's hands trembled ever so slightly as she poured Eduardo's cup. She watched the dark liquid swirl, her mind racing through rehearsed confessions, each one abandoned before it could reach her lips. Eduardo's phone buzzed on the counter, drawing his attention away from her, as it always did. He absent-mindedly thanked her for breakfast, his eyes never quite meeting hers. "Anything interesting in the mail?" he asked, voice distracted as he scrolled through work notifications. Lucia shook her head too quickly. "Just bills. Nothing urgent." She pressed her lips into a thin line, feeling the lie settle heavy in her chest. She stuffed the envelope, still sealed, still damning, deeper into her bag, as if she could bury it along with her anxiety. Their morning ritual continued in strained silence, punctuated only by the metallic clatter of spoons and the distant hum of city life. Eduardo left for work with a hurried kiss on her cheek, leaving Lucia alone in the apartment, the quiet now oppressive. She sat at the kitchen table, staring at the empty seat across from her. The hollow ache in her stomach grew sharper with every passing moment. The apartment, once a place of comfort, now felt like a stage set for her unraveling. By noon, Lucia could no longer ignore the pounding in her chest. She grabbed her keys and fled the apartment, desperate for air, for movement, for anything but the suffocating stillness. Outside, the city pulsed with energy. Vendors hawking their wares, buses rumbling past, the din of voices blending into a single overwhelming soundscape. She ducked into a small cafe on the corner, the same one she'd visited with Marta only days before. She ordered a coffee she barely tasted and stared out the rain-speckled window, her mind replaying Marta's words. "You can't fix this alone, Lucia. Secrets have a way of coming out, one way or another." She'd brushed it off, certain she could regain control. She'd pay the overdue bill, shuffle funds, and Eduardo would never have to know. But the bank's polite reminders had turned to firm warnings. Marta's advice echoed in her mind, but fear kept her paralyzed. Her phone vibrated on the table. A message from Dr. Renata. "How are you feeling today, Lucia?" Remember, courage is not the absence of fear. Lucia typed, then erased, then typed again. "I feel like everything is about to fall apart." She pressed send, her breath shallow. Late afternoon brought a new wave of anxiety. Lucia returned home, her nerves frayed. The clouds outside gathered, darkening the sky. She busied herself with small tasks, folding laundry, wiping down counters, anything to stave off the inevitable. The doorbell rang. She flinched, heart racing. It was only Marta, her face pinched with concern. "Lucia, you look pale. Did you eat today?" Marta asked, closing the door behind her. Lucia managed a weak smile. "I tried." Marta's gaze fell on the pile of unopened mail on the counter. "You can't keep running from this." Lucia's eyes stung with tears she refused to let fall. "What if he hates me, Marta? What if this ruins everything?" Marta took her hand, squeezing gently. "Keeping secrets is what ruins everything. You know that." Their conversation was interrupted by the sound of Eduardo's keys in the lock. Lucia's pulse spiked. She wiped her eyes, putting on a brave face as he entered, rain clinging to his jacket. Eduardo glanced between the women, sensing the tension. "Everything okay?" Lucia nodded, too quickly. "Just catching up." He offered a tired smile, but his gaze lingered on the counter, where a stack of mail sat waiting. He reached for it, flipping through the envelopes. Lucia's world slowed, her ears ringing. She saw the envelope, the one she'd hidden, slip from her bag earlier, now mixed in with the rest. Eduardo's brow furrowed. "What's this?" Lucia's voice caught in her throat. "It's nothing, just—" But he was already tearing it open, his eyes scanning the notice. Silence descended, thick and suffocating. He looked up, confusion turning to disbelief. "Lucia, this is from the bank. An overdue notice? We're behind on payments?" Her knees threatened to buckle. She opened her mouth, but no sound came. Eduardo's voice rose, incredulous. "How long has this been going on?" Marta stepped back, giving them space. Lucia felt exposed, as if the world had narrowed to this single moment. I made a mistake," she whispered, shame burning her cheeks. "I thought I could fix it before you found out." Eduardo shook his head, jaw clenched. "A mistake? Lucia, this is serious. Why didn't you tell me?" Tears spilled over, her composure shattering. "I was scared, Eduardo. I didn't want you to think I was irresponsible. You've been so stressed with work. I thought if I handled it, you wouldn't have to worry." He paced the small kitchen, running a hand through his hair. "So you lied to me. It wasn't— I didn't mean to lie. I didn't know what else to do." The words hung between them, raw and heavy. Eduardo leaned against the counter, rubbing his temples. "We're supposed to be a team, Lucia. You should have trusted me." Lucia's breath hitched. "I know. I'm sorry. I was just so afraid." Eduardo's shoulders sagged, the anger in his eyes giving way to hurt. "Afraid of what?" She met his gaze, her voice barely above a whisper. "Afraid that you'd see me as a failure, that you'd regret marrying me." Silence filled the space, broken only by the distant rumble of thunder. Eduardo spoke, his tone softer. "Lucia, do you really think I've never made mistakes? I feel the pressure, too, every day. Providing for us, keeping everything together. Sometimes I feel like I'm one misstep away from letting you down." His confession caught her off guard. She saw, for the first time, the weight he carried, the lines of exhaustion etched into his face. "I didn't want to add to your stress," she said, voice trembling. "And I didn't want you to see how much I worry," he replied quietly. "Maybe we've both been pretending." Marta watched from the doorway, her eyes shining with empathy. "You two need to talk. Really talk." Eduardo nodded, finally looking at Lucia. Not through her, but at her. "Why don't we sit down?" They moved to the living room, the rain now pattering against the windows. Lucia clasped her hands tightly, searching for words. "I messed up," she began. "I tried to cover it up because I was ashamed. I didn't want to disappoint you. But hiding it just made everything worse." Eduardo exhaled, the tension in his posture easing. "I wish you'd told me sooner. It's not just about the money, Lucia. It's about trust." She nodded, tears slipping down her cheeks. "I'm so sorry, Eduardo. I want to fix this, but I can't do it alone." He reached for her hand, hesitating before his fingers closed around hers. "We'll figure it out. But you have to promise. No more secrets. Whatever happens, we face it together." A sob escaped her lips, half relief, half heartbreak. She squeezed his hand, holding on as if it anchored her to the world. Marta slipped out quietly, leaving them alone in their fragile truce. Hours later, after Eduardo had retreated to their bedroom in silence, Lucia found herself wandering aimlessly through the apartment. The storm outside had passed, but the air inside still felt charged with all they hadn't said. She grabbed her jacket and made her way to the small park nearby, the city bathed in the warm hues of a setting sun. She settled onto a worn bench, the cool air prickling her skin. Her thoughts spun in restless circles: regret, fear, hope. She replayed Eduardo's words, the pain in his eyes, the flicker of forgiveness. Children's laughter drifted from the playground, distant and bittersweet. Couples strolled hand in hand, their easy intimacy a sharp contrast to the storm raging inside her. Lucia pressed her palms together, breathing deeply, searching for clarity. Her phone buzzed. A message from Dr. Renata. "It takes courage to tell the truth. Whatever happens next, you've already taken the hardest step." Lucia let out a shaky breath, her shoulders sagging. For the first time in days, the weight she carried felt lighter. Not gone, but no longer crushing. She watched the sky shift from orange to indigo, city lights flickering on one by one. With the truth finally spoken, the future was uncertain, but it was real. Her voice, soft and raw, drifted on the evening breeze. Would our marriage survive my confession? The answer, she knew, would only come with time. The apartment felt emptier than usual. For 2 days after our fight, Eduardo had stayed with his sister in Villa Mariana, leaving behind only the faintest trace of his cologne and the echo of harsh words. The silence pressed against me as heavily as my own regrets. I moved around the kitchen out of habit, wiping the counter, folding dish towels, but everything felt out of place. Even the city outside, the traffic, the vendors, the laughter of children on their way to school, seemed distant, muffled by the walls of our unresolved pain. I hadn't slept much. Each night I replayed the confrontation. The shock in Eduardo's eyes as he held the overdue notice, the way his voice trembled between disappointment and anger, and then my own confession spilling out. How I'd hidden my mistake out of fear, how I'd let that fear grow until it threatened to unravel everything we'd built together. I remembered the way he finally turned away, the door closing with a finality that made my heart lurch. I told myself I should give him space, but in the quiet moments, guilt gnawed at me. Had I destroyed our trust beyond repair? Was honesty enough if it came too late? On the third morning, I woke to the sound of my phone buzzing on the nightstand. A message from Marta. "You need to talk. Don't let silence decide for you." I stared at her words, at the way she always cut through my anxiety with a kind of practical wisdom. I wanted to believe things could be mended, but part of me was certain the damage was permanent. That afternoon, I walked to Dr. Renata's office, the São Paulo sun beating down on the sidewalks, jacaranda petals sticking to my sandals. The waiting room was cool, filled with the gentle hum of a distant air conditioner. When Dr. Renata finally called me in, I sat across from her, hands twisting in my lap. She listened as I poured out my worries, the sleepless nights, my fear that Eduardo would never forgive me, the shame of not trusting him enough to share my burden sooner. She waited for me to finish before speaking in her calm, measured voice. Lucia, forgiveness isn't just about accepting someone else's mistakes. Sometimes it's about forgiving yourself, too. Hiding the truth came from your fear, not from malice. Now that everything is in the open, what do you need most? I hesitated. I want him to trust me again. I want us to feel like a team. She nodded. That will take time. But honesty is a good place to start rebuilding. I walked home slowly, thinking about her words, about how much I wanted to believe in second chances. The city felt different, less intimidating, more alive. By the time I reached our apartment, a gentle rain had begun to fall, the drops tapping against the window panes. Just as I was about to change into dry clothes, I heard the sound of a key turning in the lock. My heart pounded in my chest. The door opened, and Eduardo stepped inside, umbrella in hand, his hair damp from the drizzle. He paused when he saw me, uncertainty flickering across his face. For a moment, neither of us spoke. The air was thick with everything we hadn't said. Then Eduardo set his bag down and took a slow, steady breath. "Can we talk?" he asked quietly. I nodded, my throat suddenly tight. We sat at the kitchen table, the same place where so many of our conversations, mundane and meaningful, had unfolded over the years. Eduardo looked tired, but there was a gentleness in his eyes that I hadn't seen in days. "I've had time to think," he began, his voice soft, "about what happened, about how I reacted. Lucia, I was hurt. I am hurt. Not just by the mistake, but by the fact that you felt like you had to go through it alone." I swallowed, forcing myself to meet his gaze. I was afraid you'd see me as a failure, that I'd let you down. I kept thinking if I could just fix it before you noticed, it would all go away. But I made everything worse. He reached across the table, his hand covering mine. We both made mistakes. I should have noticed how much you were struggling. I was too caught up in work, too distracted. And I never want you to feel like you have to hide anything from me. Tears welled in my eyes, but this time, they felt different. Less like grief, more like relief. "I want to do better," I whispered. "I want us to be honest, even when it's hard." Eduardo nodded. "Me too. We can't change what happened, but we can decide how we move forward." Together, we sat in silence for a moment, listening to the rain outside, letting the words settle between us. It wasn't a perfect resolution. There was no magical moment where everything returned to normal. But for the first time in weeks, I felt hope flicker inside me. The next day, we made a plan. We sat down with our bank statements and a notepad, mapping out a budget, listing the debts and the steps we'd take to address them. It was daunting, but Eduardo insisted we do it together. I called Marta, who offered to help us find a financial advisor in the neighborhood. She even brought over homemade pão de queijo, insisting that comfort food was a crucial part of any recovery plan. Over the weeks, things began to shift. We set aside Sunday evenings to talk, not just about bills, but about ourselves, our worries, our dreams. We started taking evening walks in the park, sharing stories about our day, holding hands like we used to when we first fell in love. The city, with all its noise and chaos, felt less overwhelming when we faced it side by side. I made a conscious effort to be more open, not just with Eduardo, but with myself. I kept seeing Dr. Renata, working through the deeper roots of my anxiety, the pressure to be perfect, the fear of disappointing those I loved. I realized that my worth wasn't defined by my mistakes, and that vulnerability could be a bridge, not a weakness. Eduardo, too, changed. He started leaving work a little earlier, making time for dinner together, learning to share his own stresses instead of bottling them up. We laughed more. We even argued. But now our fights ended with understanding, not silence. One evening, as we watched the sunset from our apartment balcony, Eduardo squeezed my hand. "You know, I never thought something like this would happen to us," he admitted. "But maybe it's what we needed, to remember what matters most." I smiled, leaning against his shoulder. "Maybe it was. I know I'm not perfect, but I'm learning, and I'm grateful you're here with me." He kissed my forehead. Sempre juntos. Always together. Looking back, I realized that our marriage hadn't been threatened by the secret itself, but by the walls we'd built around our fears. Breaking those walls down was painful, but it opened the way for something stronger. a partnership based on honesty, forgiveness, and the courage to start again. Now, every morning feels different. When I wake up, I hear the city waking with me. But the heaviness is gone. There's still work to do, still challenges ahead, but I no longer carry them alone. I've learned that love isn't about perfection, but about showing up, even when it's hard, and trusting that together we can weather any storm. If you've ever found yourself trapped by a mistake or a secret, fearing the consequences of honesty, I hope our story shows you that there's always a way forward, even if it's messy, even if it takes time. Sometimes the hardest conversations lead to the deepest connections. And now, I want to hear from you. Have you ever faced a moment where telling the truth felt impossible? How did you find the courage to move forward? Share your story in the comments below. I read every one, and your experiences might help someone else who's struggling right now. If this story resonated with you, don't forget to like this video. It really helps more people find our channel. And if you want to be part of a community that believes in honesty, growth, and real stories, make sure to subscribe and turn on the notifications so you never miss the next chapter. Thank you for sharing this journey with me. Remember, no secret is heavier than the love we can rebuild together. See you in the next story.